you know, pop culture tells us that if the world ever ends, it is going to be this, like, chaotic blur.
Oh, absolutely. Zombies, asteroids, just total panic.
Right. We are programmed to expect blurry static on our TVs and everyone scrambling around. But, well, when you step into the theology of the second coming of Christ, specifically looking at the source material we are unpacking today, that static just completely clears up.
It really does. It paints a totally different picture.
Yeah. And we were looking at Reverend Lettie Carr's comprehensive Bible study transcript today. Now, just to be clear up front for everyone listening, we aren't here to debate theology.
Right, or take sides in any religious argument.
Exactly. Our mission in this deep dive is simply to dissect the internal logic of this belief system. We want to see how this worldview is built, where the end of the world is basically the ultimate, highly organized, undeniable global broadcast. So welcome to today's deep dive.
Glad to be here. And it really is the absolute antithesis of a blurry apocalypse. When you look closely at how a specific group interprets their foundational texts, you learn a tremendous amount about how they view time, human nature, and authority.
Yeah.
The study we are looking at doesn't depict a frantic emergency response, you know. It describes an event with military precision planned since the beginning of time.
Okay, let's unpack this, because to really grasp that precision, we have to look at the symmetry the source establishes right at the start.
Yes, Reverend Carr anchors this entire study in a foundational moment from the book of Acts. Chapter 1, verse 11, I believe.
Right, so according to the text, when Jesus ascended into heaven after his resurrection, he left by going up into a cloud.
An angel stood there and explicitly told the onlookers that he would return in the exact same manner.
Cloud up, cloud down.
Exactly. It is a completely closed loop. What's fascinating here is how the source uses that seemingly minor atmospheric detail, you know, the cloud, as a built-in fraud detector.
Ooh, a fraud detector. I like that. How so?
Well, throughout history, and certainly today, you have cult leaders or individuals claiming to be the reincarnated Messiah. Reverend Carr points out that because the foundational text is so hyper-specific about the literal method of return, believers don't need to waste a single ounce of anxiety evaluating those modern claims.
Right. They just ask a simple question. Did this person crack the sky and ride down on a cloud?
Exactly. If the answer is no, the claim is instantly dismissed. It's a perfect internal logic filter.
It is a great mechanism against deception. But wait, mechanics are exactly where I have to, like, push back a bit on this, or at least admit my own struggle with the physics of
A
it?
geometry problem, right?
Yeah. The Earth is a sphere. The source references Matthew 24 and Revelation 1.7, which state that every eye will see him.
Right. Every single eye.
So how does a localized event, a guy coming down on a cloud in the Middle East or wherever, get seen by someone in Tokyo and someone in Buenos Aires at the exact same moment? Does the source, treat this as a suspension of physics?
It really does. That is the natural logistical question. And the study handles it by treating the event not as a localized weather anomaly, but as a reality-breaking metaphysical event.
So the sky literally cracking open.
Yeah, rolling back like a scroll. In the internal logic of this theology, the dimension of eternity is suddenly intersecting with the physical dimensions of our universe. It is not about Jesus entering the atmosphere.
The atmosphere itself is just torn away.
Exactly. It reveals a spiritual reality that supersedes planetary geometry. It is a simultaneous hijacking of human perception.
Wow. So it bypasses the curvature of the Earth entirely because the rules of reality are being rewritten in that fraction of a second.
Yeah, completely rewritten.
And it is not just a visual broadcast either, right? The auditory component is huge.
Oh, massive.
The source leans heavily on 1 Thessalonians chapter 4, which mentions a loud command and a trumpet call of God. Just to give some quick context for you listening, 1 Thessalonians was essentially a letter written to early Christians who were terrified their loved ones had died before this cosmic return happened.
Right, they were grieving and anxious.
So this loud, undeniable trumpet imagery was meant specifically to comfort them with the promise of a very organized reunion. But, mechanically, is the source saying a literal brass instrument is played in the sky?
Well, Reverend Carr uses this brilliant, vivid childhood memory in the transcript to break down the exact grammar and logic of this noise.
Oh, yeah. The story about her mom.
Right. She recalls being a young girl, listening to her mother politely but fiercely debate a Jehovah's Witness who knocked on their door.
Oh, to be a fly on the wall for that doorstep conversation.
Seriously. And the debate centered on a specific theological divergence, whether Jesus is actually the archangel Michael in a different form.
Okay, so how does she connect that back to the trumpet noise?
She uses this memory to forensically examine the mechanics of the text. She looks at the syntax of 1 Thessalonians. The scripture says the Lord descends with a shout, with the voice of the archangel, and with the trumpet call of God.
The operative word there being with.
Exactly. He is accompanied by those things. He isn't the things themselves. Logically, he isn't the trumpet, which would be absurd.
Right, obviously.
And he isn't the archangel. Carr reinforces this structural hierarchy by pulling in Hebrews chapter 1, which provides context that all of God's angels are commanded to worship the Son.
Oh, so within the framework of the text, a deity cannot worship itself.
Exactly. Therefore, Jesus and the archangel Michael cannot be the same entity. The noise, the shout, the trumpet is just the ultimate celestial entourage.
It's like the universe's loudest alarm clock announcing an arrival, not a single entity playing a horn.
Yes, beautifully put.
Well, if this cosmic arrival is going to be that loud, undeniable, and universally visible, I mean, the immediate human reflex is to ask, how do I make sure I'm looking up when it happens?
We want to schedule it.
Exactly. We want to put an alert in our calendar. But the source introduces a massive paradox here regarding the timeline.
Yeah, the when is the ultimate mystery of this entire belief system, and the source points straight to Matthew 24:36 to establish that.
Emphasizing that absolutely no one knows the day or the hour.
Right, not the angels, and not even the Son of God himself, only the Father holds the timeline.
Here's where it gets really interesting. The text is explicitly clear that the date is a lockbox mystery. Yet human psychology, we just cannot stop trying to pick the lock.
We are totally obsessed with predicting the end of the world.
I mean, think about how you feel when your phone battery hits 1% and you don't have a charger. That creeping, visceral anxiety. Now multiply that loss of control by eternity. That is the psychological tension this text forces believers to navigate every single day.
And that intense desire for control is exactly why the source points out historical missteps, specifically citing Harold Camping.
Oh, the billboard guy.
Yes. In the early 2000s, and again in 2011, Camping spent millions buying massive billboards across the globe, predicting the exact mathematical date of the rapture.
Causing just a tidal wave of unnecessary panic.
Exactly. People sold their homes, drained their retirement accounts, alienated their families. Reverend Carr looks at that phenomenon and essentially asks her audience, why are you exhausting your mental energy trying to decode a secret that your own foundational text literally says is impossible to decode?
Right. If you cannot know when the sky is going to crack, how do you go to the grocery store? How do you live a normal life?
The study answers this using the thief in the night concept. It draws a direct parallel to the days of Noah before the biblical flood.
Highlighting that before the rain started, people were just, eating, drinking, getting married, going to work.
They were completely consumed by the mundane rhythms of life, caught entirely off guard.
And to ground this paranoia, Reverend Carr makes a highly relatable, practical observation about an unusually cold May in Maryland.
Yes, she points out that human nature immediately tries to find patterns and anomalies. Believers might look at odd weather patterns or a sudden political crisis or an eclipse and confidently declare, aha, these are the signs. The end is near.
We want the cold May to mean something more than just a ruined barbecue.
We crave meaning in the chaos. But Carr grounds her students by explaining that even if you observe societal or environmental signs, it still doesn't generate a calendar date.
You cannot logically say, well, it snowed in May, so the trumpet is sounding next Tuesday.
Right. The internal logic requires a state of perpetual readiness rather than chronological prediction.
Which brings us to the physical reality of what happens when that perpetual readiness suddenly meets the actual event.
The actual transformation.
Yeah. We have established that a sudden, undeniable trumpet blast interrupts a random Tuesday. What physically happens to the human body in that exact fraction of a second, according to the source?
The study turns to 1 Corinthians chapter 15, which explores the mechanism of being changed in the twinkling of an eye.
Because mortal biology like flesh, blood, bone, is fundamentally incompatible with the dimension of eternity.
Exactly. Mortal bodies decay, eternity does not. Therefore, a physical upgrade is a strict mechanical requirement to survive the transition.
Reverend Carr marvels at that phrase in the transcript, the twinkling of an eye. She ponders the sheer velocity of it, asking if it is even faster than a nanosecond.
It is an incredible concept. But the source doesn't just leave it at the sci-fi idea of an instantaneous physical transformation. It dives deep into why believers must undergo a grueling preparation process for that instant moment right now, today.
Because the transformation is just biological, it's spiritual.
Yes, Carr uses the metaphor of peeling an onion to describe the current lived experience of a believer. The text demands that individuals actively shed old fleshly habits, selfish attitudes, and toxic
A
behaviors.
painful layer-by-layer process of spiritual maturation that takes a lifetime. I look at it like a background software update on your computer.
Oh, that is a great analogy.
The believer is supposedly downloading all the spiritual patches right now, fixing behavioral bugs, updating their moral code through life experiences.
Yeah.
You don't see the full operating system change immediately.
But they are preparing the hard drive for that final instant reboot when the sky cracks.
Ensuring the new software is fully compatible and comes online seamlessly. But I have to ask, what if the download is stuck at 40% when the trumpet sounds? Does the text address the threshold of readiness?
The theological framework Carr presents suggests that it isn't about achieving 100% perfection before the trumpet sounds. It is about the trajectory of the heart.
Are you actively participating in the download or are you aggressively hitting cancel?
Exactly. And she illustrates this human resistance with a fantastic anecdote from her own life. She describes taking her young son to the doctor's office for a necessary vaccination.
Oh, right. The child literally clung to the wall of the waiting room.
Yes, fighting with every ounce of his strength to avoid going into the examination room.
He was terrified of the pain of the needle, completely unable to understand the long-term immunity it was providing.
And that is Carr's exact metaphor for how humanity stubbornly clings to old habits, resentments, and sins. The divine mechanism is trying to pull them into a higher level of spiritual maturity to prepare them for an eternal reality.
And they're just desperately clinging to the drywall of their old, comfortable lives.
They fight the very transformation the text insists will save them.
It is a tragic, very human image. So if we follow the timeline laid out in the transcript, the metaphysical sky rolls back, the trumpet sounds, and those who are on the correct trajectory are instantly transformed. That structurally forces us to look at the consequences for everyone else.
Right. If some bodies are upgraded and saved, what is the mechanism for dealing with the rest of humanity?
Exactly. This leads into the source's breakdown of final judgment.
Drawing heavily on Matthew chapter 25, the study outlines the ultimate separation of humanity. It compares the divine judge to a shepherd who expertly divides his mixed flock.
The sheep, representing the righteous, are placed on the right hand.
And the goats, the unrighteous, are placed on the left.
So what does this all mean? The source gets incredibly blunt about the severity of this. Reverend Carr uses a stark, slightly humorous modern analogy to describe this eternal division, and she leaves zero room for nuance.
No nuance at all.
She tells her study group that there is no middle ground, no purgatory, no gray area. You're either going to the smoking or the non-smoking section.
The humor is dark, but the implications are absolute. It forces the listener to confront the binary nature of the text's theology. The judgment mechanism doesn't grade on a curve.
You are either in the righteous column, heading toward eternal integration, or you are in the unrighteous column, facing eternal separation.
Exactly. However, getting to that final separation involves navigating some heavily debated theological timelines, specifically regarding a period known as the tribulation.
Right, the tribulation, which, for you listening, is a prophesied 7-year period of unprecedented geopolitical and environmental suffering on Earth. But the text actually handles this debate quite graciously, doesn't it?
It really does. Within the wider theology, there is massive disagreement about when the righteous are actually removed from the earth. Reverend Carr outlines her personal belief in a pre-tribulation rapture.
Meaning before the suffering starts.
Yes. The mechanism of this belief is rooted in the logic of God's benevolence. The argument is that a loving protector would structurally remove his faithful followers before pouring out wrath on a rebellious planet. It views the rapture as an evacuation mission.
But she doesn't declare that this is the only mathematically viable reading of the text.
Far from it. The source impartially notes her respectful acknowledgement that other believers have rational arguments for mid-tribulation or post-tribulation timelines.
Right. Their logic is equally rooted in the text, arguing that historical faith has always been tested through fire.
Exactly. They believe God protects his people through the suffering, not from it, using the tribulation as the ultimate refining furnace to finalize that spiritual software update before the trumpet sounds.
The study doesn't get bogged down in demanding uniformity on the timeline. The foundational takeaway is simply the certainty of the arrival and the absolute finality of the division.
That is the core message, yes.
Which brings us to the ultimate, practical application of all this heavy theology. We have talked about clouds bypassing planetary geometry, celestial trumpets, biological upgrades, and the eternal smoking section.
It is a massive framework to take in.
But how is an apocalyptic framework supposed to impact how you, the listener, live your life today? How does it change the way you interact with your boss, or handle your finances, or deal with stress on a mundane Tuesday morning?
Well, the source provides a remarkably powerful visual metaphor to answer the "so what" of all this. Imagine the concept of eternity as a completely endless line, a line that stretches across the universe and never stops.
Okay, an endless line.
Now imagine our current earthly life, our careers, our mortgages, our 80 or 90 years of existence as just a microscopic dot drawn on that endless line.
And based on that visual, Reverend Carr issues a stark warning. The text argues that humanity invests virtually all of its emotional, physical, and spiritual capital into the little dot, risking the loss of the endless line.
The transcript summarizes this with a brilliant inversion of a famous cliche. Don't be so earthly bound, you're heavenly no good.
We usually hear the exact opposite of that phrase. People often warn, don't be so heavenly minded that you are of no earthly good.
Right, meaning you shouldn't be so obsessed with the afterlife that you ignore poverty, injustice, or human suffering right in front of you.
But the source flips that conventional wisdom on its head. It argues that the far greater, more insidious danger for the average person is getting completely swallowed up by the dot.
We become so consumed by temporary status, temporary wealth, and temporary grudges that we completely ignore our compatibility with the eternal line.
The study essentially demands that believers view their current struggles, their character flaws, and the brokenness of the world entirely through the lens of this impending, permanent cosmic shift.
When you truly internalize the logic that history has a definitive, organized finish line, it reframes every minor annoyance and major tragedy. It is a worldview built on hopeful expectation and intense preparation, rather than aimless wandering.
And that is the core insight we want you to take away from this deep dive. Regardless of your own personal beliefs, understanding the mechanics of this framework gives you a window into a mindset where everyday choices are literally eternal preparations. It transforms the mundane into the profound.
If we connect this to the bigger picture, it leaves us with a challenging thought.
Yeah.
Whether you approach this text as literal theology, expecting a physical trumpet blast and a cracking sky, or if you approach it simply as a metaphorical philosophy about human readiness and mortality, it forces all of us to confront how we measure the value of our time.
Think back to that pop culture apocalypse we talked about in the very beginning. In those blockbuster movies, the characters only figure out what actually matters: family, love, redemption, when the meteors are literally hitting the ground and the cities are burning.
The realization always comes too late.
This text demands that you figure out what matters before the sky cracks. It aggressively challenges the human assumption that we always have tomorrow to get our priorities straight.
Or tomorrow to finally forgive someone, or tomorrow to start peeling back the layers of the onion.
So, we will leave you with this final thought. If you knew for an absolute fact that your entire life, your career, your bank account, and everything you are stressing about right this second was just a microscopic dot on an endless timeline,
How would that change what you choose to worry about tomorrow?
it certainly shrinks the things that keep us awake at night.
It really does.
Thanks for joining us on this deep dive. Keep questioning, keep exploring, and we will see you next time.